How does a classically trained Italian poet, educated in the dying Roman literary tradition and suffering from a terrible eye disease, travel to France seeking healing at a saint's tomb and end up staying there forever, becoming the Bishop of Poitiers and writing the hymns that Christianity would sing for the next 14 centuries? What kind of poetic genius transforms the cross, an instrument of torture and shame, into royal banners in verse so beautiful and theologically profound that the Church still sings his words every Good Friday, every time we venerate the cross, 1400 years after he wrote them? And why is the man who gave us Vexilla Regis, Pange Lingua, and other immortal hymns, whose poetry shaped how Christians understand the cross, whose words are sung in every Catholic church worldwide, almost completely unknown today, his name recognized by scholars but forgotten by the millions who sing his songs? This is the story of Saint Venantius Fortunatus, the last great classical Latin poet who became the first great Christian hymnist, who traveled seeking healing and found a vocation, who wrote for Frankish queens but sang for the crucified king. In the fading light of the Roman world, around the year 530, a child was born near Treviso in northern Italy. The empire that had once stretched from Britain to Babylon was crumbling. Barbarian kingdoms had carved up the western provinces. Latin, the language of Virgil and Cicero, was evolving into the rough dialects that would become Italian, French, and Spanish. Yet in Ravenna, the old schools still taught the ancient arts of rhetoric and poetry, preserving flames of classical culture against the encroaching darkness. Into this twilight world came Venantius Honorius Clementianus Fortunatus, a boy whose gift for words would bridge 2 ages. His parents, sensing his unusual intelligence, sent him to Ravenna for education. There, in classrooms where the ghosts of Roman eloquence still lingered, Fortunatus learned to craft Latin verse with precision and beauty. He studied Virgil's epic cadences, Ovid's elegant couplets, Horace's measured odes. His teachers drilled him in meter and metaphor, in the subtle arts of persuasion and praise. He became, by training and temperament, a Roman poet, perhaps the last who would receive the full classical education that had shaped Western letters for 6 centuries. Yet this education, seemingly designed for a vanished world, would find its truest purpose in serving a kingdom not of this earth. Then came the darkness, not of civilization but of vision itself. A terrible eye disease struck Fortunatus, threatening to steal the sight upon which his art depended. Physicians offered little hope. The remedies of the age proved useless against the advancing blindness. For a poet whose craft required seeing both the world and the page, the prospect was devastating. He had been trained to observe beauty and translate it into words. Now beauty itself was fading from view. In his desperation, Fortunatus heard of a tomb in distant Gaul where miracles happened, where the blind received sight and the lame walked. The shrine of Saint Martin of Tours drew pilgrims from across the crumbling Roman world. With nothing left to lose, the young poet set his face toward France. He did not know that he was walking toward more than healing. He was walking toward his destiny. The journey from Italy to Tours was long and dangerous. Fortunatus traveled through alpine passes where bandits lurked and through kingdoms where the rule of law depended on the mood of local warlords. He passed through cities that had once gleamed with Roman marble and now struggled to maintain their walls. Yet with each mile, his hope grew stronger. The stories of Saint Martin's intercession were too numerous, too well attested to dismiss. The great bishop who had divided his cloak with a beggar had become, in death, a fountain of divine mercy. If God could work miracles through Martin's relics, perhaps even a poet's failing eyes could be restored. When Fortunatus finally reached Tours, around the year 565, he entered the great basilica with trembling heart. The shrine glittered with votive offerings from generations of grateful pilgrims. Candles flickered in the sacred darkness. He knelt before the tomb, poured out his soul in prayer, and waited. What happened next he would spend a lifetime trying to express in verse. The healing came, whether sudden or gradual the sources do not say, but it came. The darkness lifted from his eyes. He could see again, the candle flames, the gold of the shrine, the faces of fellow pilgrims weeping with joy at their own answered prayers. But something deeper had happened. His heart, too, had been touched. The classical poet had encountered something his education had never prepared him for: the living power of Christian holiness. Fortunatus had intended to return to Italy, to resume his career among the courts and academies of his homeland. Yet he found he could not leave. Gaul, this strange land of Frankish kings and holy bishops, had claimed him. Perhaps it was gratitude to Saint Martin. Perhaps it was a growing sense that his gifts were needed here, in this frontier of Christian civilization. Perhaps it was simply that God had other plans. Whatever the reason, Venantius Fortunatus, the Italian poet, became a permanent resident of Gaul. He would never see his homeland again. The pilgrimage that began as a desperate search for healing had become a one-way journey into a new life. The poet who came seeking sight would find vision of a different kind altogether. Word of the Italian poet's extraordinary talents spread quickly through the Frankish kingdoms. His Latin verse sparkled with a polish and elegance that few in Gaul could match. Kings and nobles, eager to add cultural luster to their rough courts, competed for his services. King Sigebert I of Austrasia became his patron, and Fortunatus composed panegyrics celebrating royal weddings, military victories, and dynastic alliances. Queen Brunhild, Sigebert's Spanish-born wife, appreciated his sophisticated verses. He traveled from court to court, banquet to banquet, composing the occasional poetry that was expected of a man of letters, praising the powerful, celebrating the prosperous, adorning festive occasions with the flowers of classical rhetoric. It was pleasant work, and Fortunatus was good at it. His verses earned him comfortable lodgings, generous gifts, and access to the highest circles of Merovingian society. Yet something was missing. The poems he wrote for kings were technically accomplished but spiritually hollow. They praised earthly glory that would fade, celebrated victories that would be forgotten, honored beauty that would wither. The poet who had been healed at a saint's tomb found himself writing verse that any pagan Roman might have composed. Then he met the woman who would change everything, a former queen who had traded her crown for a veil. Radegund had been a Thuringian princess, captured as a child when the Franks destroyed her kingdom and killed her family. Forced to marry King Clothar I, she endured years in a brutal court before finally escaping to religious life. Now she lived in Poitiers, having founded a monastery dedicated to the Holy Cross, where she and her nuns devoted themselves to prayer, study, and charity. When Fortunatus visited the monastery, he encountered a holiness that his courtly world could not offer. Radegund was cultured and intelligent, able to appreciate his poetry, but she was also profoundly spiritual, living entirely for Christ. Their friendship, deep and pure, would last until her death and beyond. In Radegund, Fortunatus found not a patron but a soul companion, someone who called forth not his technical skill but his deepest devotion. For her and her community, he would write his greatest works. In the year 569, an extraordinary event occurred at Poitiers. The Byzantine Emperor Justin II, at Radegund's request, sent a relic of the true cross to her monastery. The fragment of wood upon which Christ had died was coming to Gaul. It was a gift of immeasurable spiritual significance, and Radegund wanted the arrival to be marked with appropriate solemnity. She turned to her friend, the poet. Could Fortunatus compose something worthy of the occasion, a hymn to accompany the relic's procession into the city? What Fortunatus produced in response would echo through 14 centuries of Christian worship. Standing in his room, perhaps by candlelight, he began to write. Vexilla Regis prodeunt, fulgit crucis mysterium. The royal banners forward go, the cross shines forth in mystic glow. With these words, he accomplished a theological revolution in verse. The cross, that instrument of Roman torture, designed to humiliate and destroy, became in his poetry a royal standard, a banner of triumph. Christ's crucifixion was not defeat, but victory. The wood that bore the Saviour's body became a throne from which he reigned. O crux av, spes unica, he wrote. Hail, O cross, our only hope. The shame of Golgotha was transformed into glory. The theology was not new. Paul had proclaimed the wisdom of the cross centuries before. But Fortunatus gave it poetic form so beautiful, so memorable, so singable, that it entered the Church's permanent liturgical treasury. He followed Vexilla Regis with another masterpiece, Pange Lingua gloriosi proelium certaminis. Sing, my tongue, the glorious battle, a hymn that narrated salvation history from Eden's tree to Calvary's cross. The same poet who had written flattering verses for Frankish kings now wrote immortal hymns for the King of Kings. The classical techniques learned in Ravenna, the metrical precision, the rhetorical power, the musical Latin, all found their highest purpose in praising Christ crucified. Fortunatus had discovered what his education was truly for. When the relic of the true cross entered Poitiers that day, carried in solemn procession while voices sang Vexilla Regis, a new era of Christian hymnody began. The poet who had come to Gaul seeking healing had given the church songs it would never stop singing. As years passed, Fortunatus settled permanently in Poitiers, drawn by his friendship with Radegund and his growing devotion to religious life. He was ordained a priest, trading the role of wandering court poet for that of spiritual father. He continued to write, producing lives of saints, including a biography of Saint Martin that expressed his lifelong gratitude for his healing. He celebrated local holy men and women, preserving their stories for future generations. Yet his hymns remained his crowning achievement, works that combined classical artistry with Christian devotion in a synthesis that would define medieval liturgy. Radegund died around 587, and Fortunatus mourned her deeply. Their friendship had been the purest relationship of his life, a meeting of minds and souls that transcended the conventions of their age. Some scholars have wondered whether his feelings contained a romantic element. His poems to her are tender and admiring, but whatever stirred in his heart, both remained faithful to their vocations. She died a holy nun, he would die a bishop. Their friendship, conducted entirely within the bounds of chastity and Christian virtue, produced spiritual fruit that fed the Church for centuries. In honoring her, he had honored Christ. In serving her monastery, he had served the kingdom of heaven. Around the year 599, Fortunatus was consecrated Bishop of Poitiers. The poet became a pastor, responsible not for verses but for souls. We know little of his episcopal ministry, which lasted only a few years before his death around 600 to 609. He was elderly by then, perhaps approaching 80, a remarkable age for that era. He had lived to see the classical world of his youth fade into memory and a new medieval civilization emerge. He had served kings and queens, befriended saints, and written poetry that would outlast empires. Now, as his own light dimmed, he could trust that his words would continue to shine. The last Roman poet had become the first great Christian hymnist, and his legacy was secure. Today, every Good Friday, in Catholic churches around the world, the faithful gather to venerate the cross. As the crucifix is carried forward, voices rise in an ancient hymn. Vexilla Regis prodeunt, the royal banners forward go. Few in the congregation know who wrote these words. The name Venantius Fortunatus appears in no popular devotion, inspires no widespread cult. He was never formally canonized, though the Church honors him as a saint. His feast day, December 14, passes largely unnoticed. Yet his poetry lives on, sung by millions who have never heard his name, shaping how Christians understand and worship the cross. This is perhaps the deepest paradox of his legacy. Fortunatus achieved a kind of immortality that most artists never attain. His words woven permanently into the Church's worship, but he achieved it anonymously. The hymns belong now not to him but to the Church, to Christ. When we sing Pange Lingua during Holy Week or Salve Festa Dies at Easter, we participate in a tradition he began without thinking of him at all. His art has become so integrated into Christian worship that it seems to have no human author, as if it always existed, as if it sprang directly from the Church's heart. For a Christian poet, perhaps this is the highest honor, to disappear into the mystery you celebrate. to become invisible so that only Christ remains visible. His life offers enduring lessons. To artists, he shows that classical training and secular skills can serve sacred purposes, that the highest art finds its truest expression in worship. To poets, he demonstrates that beauty and truth are not enemies but allies, that theological depth and literary excellence can unite. To all Christians, he reveals the power of transformed vision. The man who came to Gaul with failing eyes received not only physical sight but spiritual insight. He learned to see the cross not as Romans saw it, as shameful torture, but as Christians must see it, as royal triumph. And what he saw, he helped the whole church to see, through poetry that has never stopped singing. Saint Venantius Fortunatus, the Italian poet who traveled to France and never returned, the court versifier who became a bishop, the last classical Latin poet who became the first great Christian hymnist. His name is largely forgotten. His words are eternal. The royal banners still go forward. The cross still shines forth in mystic glow. And somewhere, surely, the poet who taught us to sing these truths rejoices that his art accomplished its highest purpose, pointing not to himself but to the crucified King whose victory he celebrated, whose glory he proclaimed, whose mystery he made beautiful for every generation that would follow.